Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. It is getting hot in Miami. Mercedes seemingly finally taking some steps back in the right direction. They've explained though that the upgrades that they've seen so far this weekend aren't necessarily due to the changes they've made on the car, but mainly due to some track specific issues. Red Bull and Max Verstappen though, very tough day for them yesterday. Can they bounce back for the rest of the weekend? Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'll greatly appreciate it. This first from Lando, Norris thought it was kind of cool. It's got the basketball-esque helmet going on right here. Maybe it would have suited George more, considering they are bouncing a little bit more right now. Now, of course, this weekend so far, most teams yesterday in practice weren't really suffering the bouncing all that much. Mercedes, it was still there to a degree. Certainly, I think they got a bit too greedy. They'll explain here in a second about the kind of the ride height that they were running with. But they seem to have found so far a decent compromise with this track with a few of the minor upgrades they've brought through to actually be much more competitive. At least so far this weekend, all could change. It's only practice at the end of the day. But yeah, lots to dive into. Firstly, we've got to discuss this jewellery drama because this has been like getting pretty heated the last 24 hours or so. Like we saw, of course, that Hamilton turned up to this press conference, 4 chains, 3 watches, and like 8 rings or whatever, to protest the fact that the FIA are now clamping down, it seems, on this rule that's been in place for, several years, since like probably 15 or so years, to be honest. There's probably been 1,000 races that have been run with this rule, and only now they're saying, okay, you're not allowed any jewellery effectively because it's, well, for safety reasons. Now, you could well argue that over those 1,000 races, has there really been any issues in which this has caused any problem? Probably not, at least that I know of. Therefore, like, is it actually a safety concern, really? And also, you can look at the fact that, well, the FIA, how much do they really care about safety when there was missiles going off a few miles from the track in Saudi Arabia a month and a bit ago, and not really all that much was done about that. And also the fact that I believe the wedding rings, like if you wear a wedding ring, apparently that's allowed. So it's like, okay, if that's allowed, but yet you're not allowed to wear the stuff that Hamilton wears, it's like, I think to a degree is justified while he feels very frustrated about this. And that's the thing, it's now kind of part of the technical or specifications that you kind of have to submit as a team before the race weekend effectively. So like, and therefore if you don't comply, you are subject to, well, fines and bans and race bans, this type of stuff, like is actually possible penalty points, which might come into effect. So we'll see what happens there. I believe, also Vettel's kind of been back in Hamilton on this. He was wearing this because there's some rules about like clothing regulations now, fireproof type stuff, and he was wearing this effectively just to take the piss out of the FIA and support Hamilton, right? He actually says this, that the jewellery ban feels personal and targeted at Lewis Hamilton. They also included our watches in the kind of jewellery discussion, so not sure what that's going to do to the real, like the Rolex sponsorships or whatever, but I guess we'll see about that one. But these guys don't really seem to think it has all that much to do with safety, but rather it's kind of, like a targeted, like personal attack effectively, and I feel like, Hamilton probably thinks it's a step in on his kind of like body autonomy, right? So I guess we'll see how this one develops, but yeah, he's certainly not happy about it. It seems like he's been granted like an exemption effectively for the next couple of races, or at least for this weekend, the next couple of weeks, but he must remove it apparently for the Spanish Grand Prix. He says he's got 2 piercings that he can't remove. One of them is in a place that he doesn't want to mention, and I think the other one being his nose that he can't remove himself. So like he's got to get them removed, I think. I think that's the plan right now. So a bit of a frustration actually is confirmed if it's a 2 race exemption. He has until Monaco to get rid of it. So yeah, like I don't know how this is going to go, but there's certainly been some drama about this the last few days. But of course, on the more positive side for Mercedes, this I thought was actually great for the Mercedes admin right here, because last week P11, P14, where I think the results in, was it qualifying? I think it was qualifying, or maybe the sprint race, it was kind of similar between the two of them. This week they can cross out the ones on both because it was George who was P1 and Lewis P4 in FP2 yesterday. Remarkable turnaround. Of course, yes, it's just practice. We did see, of course, in Imola that I'm pretty sure George Russell tops the timesheets in FP2 as well, but in fairness, like that probably mattered less because most other teams, like qualifying had already happened at that point, so most teams there were just going for race pace and just messing it, well, not really messing around, obviously. There was obviously some, method behind the madness, but like they weren't really pushing for quali kind of sim laps like they were here. So like this certainly means more than the kind of result last week. Quick recap of practice, actually, Carlos Sainz once again binned it in the wall. Like, honestly, this track is unforgiving. There's no doubt. There's been a lot of talk about this chicane, like the fact that the end of this sector 2, very tricky indeed. There's a lot of tricky corners on this track. Some of the drivers don't like it, right? But my question is, should we really care that much about how much the drivers like it? Because, the drivers aren't going to necessarily like corners that are too challenging, but maybe the challenge is exactly what we want to see from a fan perspective. So there's certainly been some talk about that chicane. Maybe it does need to get changed. The cars look a bit clumsy over there, but it's going to generate some mistakes. There's no doubt about it. Carlos Sainz going into this corner, carried a bit too much speed, ends up in the wall. Once again, not the greatest start to the weekend for him. But if anything, Verstappen had a worse day in the Red Bull because he comes out for the day. I think they changed his gearbox between FP1 and FP2. He comes out immediately after the gearbox change, and his steering basically breaks down. He can't steer the car properly. The brakes are immediately overheating. He goes back into the garage, and that's the end of his day. So he got very few laps at all in on day one of practice on a pretty challenging track as we have seen to actually figure out this car and how it's going to work with the track and all this type of stuff. So yeah, difficult times for sure for the Red Bull guys and also Max Verstappen individually. He kind of explained it was a very painful day for him, as he described right here, an extremely painful day. Certainly here you want to get to know the track, but I only did 4 or 5 fast laps. We now have 0 info on my car here, right? It says FP3, there's qualifying to come, but of course it's going to be not ideal still so far for the Red Bull guys. These were the overall results. So Russell was P1, the only driver sub 130. Leclerc right behind, about a tenth behind. Perez about, well, 2 tenths behind. Hamilton was pretty much around the same point. This, of course, only considers the kind of quali sim laps, right? Like low fuel load, going for the fastest possible lap you can. That's where the Mercedes look the best, to be honest. The kind of lower drag rear wing seemed to help with the porpoising to a degree. Like, the kind of, well, I was kind of surprised at how little they had on the straights, to be honest. Of course, with DRS open, that does help them as well to a degree. Of course, it doesn't consider the long run pace because they do like a race sim as well. And in that one, I'm pretty sure it was Perez who was marginally faster than Leclerc in about the 133s, and Russell couldn't quite match that, right? He was a little bit behind, but still, he was only losing about a second every few laps, which certainly is much closer to the pace, right? Because, well, they've been losing a second a lap for the last few races to the leaders. In this kind of sim, they were losing a second every like 4 or so laps. So definitely, if Mercedes can be this weekend within a few tenths in race pace of the top dogs, like that shows a market improvement, no doubt, even though the track maybe does favour them this weekend. And in fairness, they didn't really change all that much, right? They brought the new front wing, they brought the new rear wing, like they've changed maybe a couple of things outside of that, but pretty much nothing much has happened on this car. It's pretty much the same thing, but there was some talk about the fact that they're going to bring some upgrades for this weekend, test some things out, and if they work, they're going to bring more of the same, right, and kind of align that kind of vision that they've created this weekend with what they're going to bring further forwards for Barcelona and the like in, of course, 2 weeks' time. So, like, if that's the case, then it's actually rather promising for Mercedes that clearly some of their upgrades are working, therefore, like, it feels like they kind of know the direction they should go in, but as Toto Wolff says, it's not good enough yet. The new parts reduce drag, that's, of course, a key one. The asphalt helps here with the bounce, he reckons, but we have to be honest, it's not like we have found a groundbreaking solution. So he does reckon that if they went back to Imola or another track, and there was some talk from Andrew Chauvelin as well, the fact that they weren't really sure still why in Saudi Arabia they had worse porpoising than they did in Bahrain, for example. So still there is more seemingly to understand, but obviously, getting P1, P4 in a session like this, competing with the Red Bulls and the Ferraris on kind of one lap quali sim pace was seemingly a step in the right direction. Whether they can maintain that later today, because you could argue Ferrari were running at lower engine mode, and it still seems like the Red Bull has less drag overall to get at a pretty significantly higher speed on the straight. So like still there's work to be done, no doubt about it. But just this turnaround so far this weekend seems rather promising. This also was mentioned as well here by Giuliano De Chessa, kind of reckons that he thinks that actually Ferrari were using less horsepower, or maybe Mercedes had less fuel in the tank, for example. So like maybe that was where some of the difference was coming from. Always difficult to say, right? Like the fuel load, all this type of stuff. How easy it is to kind of compare across the cars. But no doubt some improvements for them, and it might end up Mercedes kind of extend their advantage away from the midfield. I think McLaren were also saying that this track doesn't really seem to suit them so well. It's like it could be like a 1-2 again for Red Bull Ferrari, as we might expect, but Mercedes might be closer to the pace, which I think we would like to see them get up there. A 3-way fight would be absolutely glorious. Now, as I say, one of the more promising things here for Mercedes is, as Giuliano De Chessa says a few days ago, they said they will do some tests here in Miami in free practice, as they have done. If they work, they will work a lot in Barcelona, i.e. if they find a solution that actually seems to be taking them in the right direction, they can kind of go all in on that development path and bring some really significant upgrades. So even if this weekend it doesn't lead to them winning the race or anything, they seem to probably know which way they should go. And I think Andrew Chauvelin, and just looking at some of the body language, they seem to be much more optimistic than they have been, even though of course they're still going to say the words but okay, yeah, we don't know what's really changing. George Russell said it as well, basically saying, look, this means nothing. I don't actually know what we changed to make the car better. I think Hamilton echoed something similar. It's like, okay, I'm not really sure what we've done here, but and it feels rather similar, but somehow we're quicker this weekend. So it probably is, to a degree, a track-specific thing. The reduction in drag does seem to be helping, but it does seem like now there is some kind of promise within this car. There's what they're looking for. Of course, the track also helps in the sense that it's very hot out there, and that the tyre warm-up issue was a massive problem for them in Imola. So this kind of the asphalt or whatever that discussion is helping with the bouncing, and also just the way the track seems to be designed to a degree, and also the fact that it's hot, the tyre warm-up isn't an issue, kind of alleviates some of Mercedes' problems, and because it's a very fast track, low downforce track, don't have to run so much downforce, that's going to kind of help with the porpoising issue anyway. So for all these kind of reasons, it seems to be favouring them this weekend, but certainly still some improvement of note, I believe. This also, as some of the engineers say, I thought was rather interesting. Only when we solve the bouncing do we see the potential of our car. The new wings have noticeably reduced drag along with lowered vehicle height. Suddenly Mercedes were driving as far as kind of what's explained in this article right here. Maybe this day of practice gives us a good idea of what the picture could be like if the bouncing didn't exist. They believe it could return in Barcelona, the bouncing issues, but they're relatively confident that they can take a step. And if they can go from like 8 tenths behind to 2 tenths behind in a kind of race pace this weekend, it does create a much more competitive picture for what they could have going forwards. And as they say, we were getting lower and lower with the ground clearance. I think they were getting too greedy, as they describe here. The car bounced again because we were too greedy. That's the thing there. Put the mediums on, put more fuel load in, probably got a bit too greedy with the ride height of the car, put it a bit too low, and that didn't help them, right? So maybe a new floor or whatever, in combination with these other aero changes, might still be the key. But apparently the engineers reckon they can still drive at a vehicle height here, which guarantees us decent lap times, which is certainly what Mercedes fans will want to hear. Some slight concerns still from the Red Bull guy. which of course Verstappen didn't really get to do all that much. Perez was actually leading just about the long run table with an average lap time of 1:33.9. The Mercedes couldn't quite get down to that point. But, well, Perez actually fears that they didn't really learn all that much this weekend, didn't learn anything about the car with a lot of fuel, so many red flags. Hope it was the same with many other teams, but still, Red Bull had the fastest straight line speed, no doubt, like way ahead of the Ferrari, and still the Mercedes quite a bit down also. So still, it seems like the Red Bull have some more advantage in their back pocket here. The strongest weapon of that straight line speed seems to still be in their pocket. There was also some talk about the track. We actually mentioned that Mercedes, well, the chicane briefly. This is what Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton had to say on it, that it reminds him of driving karts around B&Q car parks in the UK back in the day. I think like the clip came out and he said, I would describe it as, and then he stopped himself because I think he was probably going to say something along the lines of it's the worst track on, or the worst corner on the calendar, or like at one of the worst corners he knows in Formula 1 or whatever. But as I say, whether the drivers like it or not doesn't necessarily mean it's going to create bad racing at the end of the day. There has been some concern about that though, because actually as well, Norris said and Perez said, admittedly to maybe the more pessimistic drivers on the grids, that they actually reckon that it's going to be very tough to overtake because there's no grip off the racing line. They said that on the racing line you can get grip, but if you move off the racing line, there's not much grip on this asphalt, the way it's been put down or whatever, like not much rubber on it as well. So like that might cause some issues. Like still, when the race comes around, if there's rain today or tomorrow or whatever, like it obviously will create something. I still think we're in for a good weekend, but there has been some concern that the overtaking will be harder than you might imagine it to be, given the long DRS straights and stuff, because it might be really hard to brake and actually get good traction on the kind of off the racing line, which it might be just the fact that it's a new track at the end of the day. But time will only tell this weekend. And just to finish up with this as well, of course, so far this season, even last year, of course, I guess Max Verstappen winning that Grand Prix somehow, and then of course, well, Charles Leclerc. Since then, they've been trading effectively back and forth. So this weekend, after, well, if you at least follow this pattern, you can only imagine there's going to be one winner, but it could be a very different story. Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.